Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Morning.
Great. We're so glad that you, well, actually, good afternoon, because we have to cover the East Coast time zones as well. My name is Iris Gonzalez. I'm the project manager for Smart Policing Initiative, and I just want to go over a few administrative notes before we get started with today's webinar. First of all, I'd like to remind everyone, if you don't have a mute button, if you could please mute your lines so that we won't hear your typing or rustling of papers while the presentation is ongoing. If you'd like to mute, you can *6 to mute and then #6 to unmute. Okay? We really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Today's webinar is going to cover crime analysis for smart policing. The webinar is going to be given today by Julie Wartell. She's our subject matter expert, and she's also a crime analyst for San Diego. And you're very fortunate today because actually Julie has quite a bit of useful experience with crime analysis. She's been doing this for a long time. She started out as a field researcher with the Police Executive Research Forum. And then from there, she moved on, and she was a crime analyst with San Diego, where she still is today. But since then, she's been doing work such as a research fellow at the National Institute of Justice. She's also done work for the Institute of Law and Justice as doing technology associate, senior research there. She's also worked on other coordinating research projects with crime analysis, particularly in the San Diego County District Attorney's Office. And she works as a consultant in this area as well. So we're very fortunate to have her today us through a presentation that basically talks to us about crime analysis, what it is, what are good components of it, how do you do it, and how can you incorporate it into smart policing practices at your locations today. Without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Julie Wartell. Julie, you've got the con. Julie? You may have to unmute your line.
Okay.
Julie? Okay, while we're working out the technical issues with Julie getting on the line, if we could take a moment, if you can unmute your lines and just give us a shout out as to where you're calling in from today.
Oh, come on.
Brian Hill from Glendale, Arizona.
John Edwards, Claxton, Georgia.
Tom Fraser, Baltimore, Maryland.
Lynn Vincent Nathan from the Bar Police Study.
Mark Russo and Pat Rousey from Kansas City, Missouri PD.
James Hall from Savannah Chatham Metropolitan Police Department.
Judy Keelan, Kentwood.
Joan Fiesta, University of Illinois Police Department.
From Philadelphia, we have Danielle Moore, Heather McCaffrey, and John Ross. Alicia Spencer and Jerry Clark from Fuller Police Department.
Katie Werner and Maris Meld from Cincinnati Police.
Toledo Police.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Are you on Verizon?
I'm using Google Voice, actually. Okay, sorry about that. I don't know what happened. I heard everything that Iris said, and thank you very much for that introduction, Iris. The long story short is that I've had a lot of jobs, but they've all been related to crime analysis in some way. And so I'm going to attempt to teach a lot of material in the next hour, or 52 minutes as we have left. And we do have some stop and thinks along the way. So I'm going to make you guys participate as well, because it feels weird trying to teach to a group out there without, being able to have any interaction.
And if I could take a moment, Julie, one thing I neglected to mention at the start, this is Iris. If you notice, there's a chat function on the right-hand side of your screen. Julie's going to have several stop and moments during the presentation. If you have a question or you can chat, use the chat function to type it out, and so I'll be able to interject. Issues can be brought to Julie's. All right, Julie, thanks again.
No problem. Okay. So let's start off with a test about the risk of a home being reburglarized is highest, A, within 24 hours, B, 2 to 7 days, C, 1 to 2 months, and D, 4 to 6 months. Just think about that for a second. And the answer is 1 to 2 months. So think to yourself whether you knew that information or not. One more question for you. Once a home has been burglarized, the risk of repeat victimization increases by a factor of 2, 4, 6, or 8. And the answer is 4 times. So why is this important, and how does this relate to crime analysis? It's important in that it is based on research, and that's what smart policing is about, is using research and data. And why is it important for crime analysis? Because even though this is research that has been proven, every jurisdiction may be slightly different. So knowing this type of information about your jurisdiction, and that will help you better understand your problem. There is an echo. I see someone's asking. I don't know if it's me. I heard an echo on Iris when she was talking too. Okay, it looks like they're trying to work on the echo, so hopefully that's going to be fixed and you won't have to hear me twice for everything I heard. So what are we going to cover in the next 50 minutes or so? Hopefully by the end you will understand the various types of crime analysis and where smart policing fits in, benefits and ways of partnering between the analyst and the external researcher, and identify crime analysis resources available through smart policing. So what are some opportunities for crime analysis as part of the smart policing initiative? We're going to talk about, through these slides, what is crime analysis, how are we using crime analysis to define the problem for our smart policing projects, and working with the external researcher. What's the role of the crime analyst in working with that external researcher? So what is crime analysis? Lots of different definitions of crime analysis. What I'm going to talk about today is that kind of traditionally there were 3, administrative, tactical, and strategic, and we've kind of added problem solving as similar to strategic crime analysis into the mix as we've gotten more involved in problem-oriented policing and problem solving. Forecasting, gone. I can't talk without, I'm back. Nope. Sorry everyone, I don't know, they just took away the slides from me. Iris, should I be continuing? Oh, there we go. Okay. Welcome back, everyone. Forecasting and predictive analysis, those seem to be some buzzwords these days as it relates to crime analysis. And then real-time crime analysis and intelligence-led policing. So all very related, and we'll try and kind of talk about some examples of those throughout this presentation. So in the most basic of terms, Crime analysis is the transition from data to knowledge. And this graphic was taken out of the IACA's book, Exploring Crime Analysis, on page 8. One of the resources that you were given ahead of time, I'm not sure how many of you took a look at it, but really goes into detail about the different types of crime analysis. But for this purpose, what's really important is that there's a ton of data out there, and what we need to do is analyze that data, which turns it into information. And that's not the end. That little kind of arrow takes you back. There might be more analysis that you need to do once you have that information, or more data you need to collect. Then once we have that information, how are we communicating that to become knowledge? So the important thing is that we have raw data, we analyze it, then it is information, we communicate that information. So whether it's the patrol officer in the field or the chief of police and everyone in between, that we are using this information to make decisions, policies, etc. So administrative analysis, any analysts that really enjoy this aspect of crime analysis, but it's a necessary evil. It's all of those statistical reports, research-type statistics, and other projects that are not focused specifically on the reduction or elimination of a pattern or trend. So an example of this is from San Diego. This is a typical Uniform Crime Report, or UCR crimes. Every police department in the country has to report to the FBI. And so we have these standard crimes, standard numbers that we report every month. This happens to be an automated report out of San Diego, broken down by the different communities in San Diego. But what we can see here is what goes up and what goes down. So that's traditionally what we've measured. In the last 10, 15 years, we've really taken crime analysis to the next level. So we've taken these administrative reports and we said, what else can we do with the data? And so the next thing that really kind of came about in crime analysis was tactical analysis, the identification and analysis of emerging or existing crime patterns, including series and hotspots. So we might say it's about catching the bad guy or predicting where the next crime is going to happen so we can send our personnel out to be there for the next store that's going to be robbed, etc. So an example of this is from Scottsdale, Arizona, a bulletin that's actually won an award at the International Association of Crime Analysts Conference. An example of a type of tactical bulletin that we might see in police departments of, we know this about the Big Boy Bandit robbery series. What do we know about the MO, the suspect, the time, all of that? Oftentimes we will then add a map to that to say here's where the other ones occurred, here's where it's likely to occur. So this is becoming very more common these days in crime analysis. The third one that I described was strategic or from the IACA book, the definition of strategic being that it focuses on long-term trends or chronic problems in crime and disorder. A more specific definition that we came up with years ago, problem analysis, is that it's an approach or method or process conducted within the police agency in which formal criminal justice theory, research methods, and comprehensive data collection and analysis procedures are used in a systematic way to conduct in-depth examination, develop informed responses to evaluate crime and disorder problems. As you can see, the blue that's highlighted, the important aspects. And for those of you that have been involved with smart policing, you can also see that a lot of those words and a lot of what we're supposed to be doing as part of smart policing is in this definition. So I would say in most of the smart policing sites, this is the type of crime analysis that we're looking towards, and there are obviously a lot of different variations of this. So in terms of some examples for strategic or problem analysis, most importantly, again, this was one of the recommended readings, the Crime Analysis for Problem Solvers in 60 Small Steps. This is essentially my Bible, and I would say that, any crime analyst or anyone working with the crime analyst should take a look at this. It really redefines that traditional crime analyst role, and everything from how crime analysts should really get away from the computer to some basics on some theories and how we can create spreadsheets and do some of our analysis. So you can order it free from the COPS office or download it from the POP Center site. In terms of examples, I like to use this example. It's a little older, from San Diego County. For those of you not familiar with San Diego County, we're right on the Mexican border. And we had, for a time in the early 2000s, well over 20,000 auto thefts every year. So at one point, I think we peaked at about 25,000 auto thefts for our county. And Chula Vista, one of the cities and departments in South San Diego, as you can see on the map, had a regional project about auto theft. So this is an example of how we use traditional UCR stats to say we had 20,000 auto thefts or 25,000 auto thefts. But if we're going to reduce crime or prevent crime and prevent auto theft specifically, we really need to do an in-depth analysis of auto theft. So this was one of the many types of analyses that Chula Vista did, was look at not only where are the auto thefts happening, but in this case, where are the cars or vehicles being recovered. Important in when you're looking at auto theft are the recoveries, because that tells us sometimes more about the theft and the underlying problem than the theft crime reports themselves. So I'd have you take a look at these maps, and you'll also see that they broke it down into cars versus trucks. So not all vehicle thefts and not all vehicle recoveries are the same. Just like if you're looking at burglaries, a residential burglary and a commercial burglary are two entirely different problems. A vehicle burglary, a third entirely different problem. So I'm going to give you a minute to look at those maps. I'm sure you've been looking at it while I've been yammering on. And we're going to have our first stop and think. So I'll go back to the map and show you that. But think about this. How do the previous maps help us understand, if we were going to say we want to understand the vehicle theft problem in San Diego County? And also think about, after seeing these, what are some other things you want to know? In other words, what further analysis should be done simply based on these maps? So this is where you can write into Iris or all, and she will monitor it, and we will have a little discussion in a minute. Okay, you guys got to ask at least one question. Don't all be sleeping out there. Or make one comment.
Yeah, search warrant. We didn't get any information on yet because the guy's supposed to do some work out.
Please feel free to unmute and speak up. So far, we've gotten some comments about specific vehicle types that were stolen, about trends, why Escondido is the preferred destination, from Mark Russo. Trucks and cars have different ultimate destinations, chopped versus reused, from Jerry Cork. Looking at times of day as possible further analysis that could be done. And then Lynn also brought up that they look like they were going across the border.
Also, they called everybody through last night.
Say the other way.
All very good comments, right on with that. So we do want to know all of those questions, obviously, and more, that we see very different patterns with cars and trucks. We see very different patterns with North San Diego and South San Diego. So obviously the ones closer to the border, we're losing over the border because we're not recovering them. Versus up in Oceanside, we're recovering most of them. We may have a joyriding problem instead of a chopping or exporting problem. So that also generated more questions with Chula Vista, and one of the things that they looked at, as a couple of you mentioned, what types of vehicles, and are there differences among them? So one of the things that they looked at, they had these target lots, so they chose the 10 parking lots that were the most auto thefts. I think they accounted for about 15% of all of their auto thefts from these 10 lots. So they compared these lots to the rest of the city and in the nation. So nationally, 62% that year of vehicles were recovered.
Well, if you're trained,
you can't see the numbers on this slide. I used to see the numbers. But what you do see is that the recovery of vehicles stolen in Chula Vista was just under the national average. If you look at autos stolen from Chula Vista, it's above, whereas trucks are way below. And then when you look at the target lots, you see very different. You see a low amount of vehicles recovered from the lots. Nissan Sentras are higher for whatever reason. Nissan trucks, as it goes down. Toyota trucks, only 13% of Toyota trucks were recovered. Slightly higher, 20-something% of Toyota Camrys. So we have a real specific problem here that we'd want to then ask additional questions about. What is it about Toyota trucks and Toyota Camrys that we're losing over the border more vehicles? So moving on, a few other recent applications of crime analysis, as I mentioned, if we broke it down in the traditional way of saying administrative, tactical, and strategic or problem solving, these are more what I consider applications. It's not really a type of crime analysis, but we are using in the crime analysis field our different methods to do now more forecasting and predictive crime analysis. The idea of using historical and contextual data to forecast where crime is most likely to happen. And this can really range from predicting a particular place to an area, that this neighborhood or this area or this block is going to have more of a particular type of crime based on the information we know about that block or that neighborhood and based on what crime has happened there before. Another one, real-time crime analysis, the idea of looking at current data. So instead of saying we want to look at a year or 2 years of data where we would do that in strategic or problem solving, this is saying what's going on now and how can we get this quick information, a quick set of analyses out to the field for decision making. And then lastly, intelligence-led. And there's lots of different definitions that have floated around about intelligence-led policing. But I think for our purposes, it's the idea of combining intelligence or the unofficial data that many police departments collect, often in the investigative or the intel side of the house, with traditional police data. Using that gang intel combined with the gang crime cases that we see for a more in-depth analysis of whether it's crime problems, offenders, and places. So, moving on to the next section of defining the problem. Essentially, we all had to define the problem for our smart policing initiatives, and some of those problems, the definitions have changed over the, people on this call and throughout the smart policing initiatives. Some people are really new at this, have just received their money and started their projects. Some people have been at it for 2.5 years. So the problem definitions, some have changed more drastically than others, but the underlying issue is that it's impossible without data and analysis to define your problem. We have traditionally defined problems with traditional sources, those good old crime reports. How many crimes did we have? Here's what our problem is. What smart policing is asking is we need to use non-traditional sources to help us define our problems. We often will start with those traditional sources, but we want to move into non-traditional sources as well. And there's no better way to define our problems and analyze our problems than the problem analysis triangle. So this triangle was created kind of based on the fire triangle, where you need 3 things to have a fire, right? You need fuel, oxygen, and heat. And the way to get rid of a fire is to get rid of at least one of those sides of the triangle. same idea with a crime problem. All crimes have an offender, a place, and a target or a victim. Traditionally in policing, we've focused on that offender side. If only we could get rid of the offender, we could get rid of crime. What we've learned over the years is that that's not necessarily the case, that sometimes we really need to focus on changing the place, or educating the victim, or removing the target. So what this triangle really helps us do in crime analysis is, what types of data do we need? What questions do we want to ask about all sides of the triangle? What's everything we want to know about these offenders, about these places, and about these targets and victims? Then we need to say, let's go out and collect the data, answer our questions, and then we can truly understand what our problem is and better define our problem. So our traditional sources, as I mentioned, crimes is usually the first one. We pull data from our records management systems. A lot of times people use arrest data. Depending on the problem, we may not have crime data for drug issues or prostitution issues. Those might only show up in arrest reports. Can be very important to understanding your problem, but you need to always keep in the back of your mind that arrests are generated from the police going out there and doing the activity. So we can't necessarily say that drugs are not happening in a different area simply because there are no arrests. I always like to use as an example in San Diego, in Pacific Beach neighborhood, we do have quite a few bars in our neighborhood. When I say our neighborhood, that's exactly where I'm sitting right now. We also have what people like to say are the most DUIs in the city. So if we said, where is the drunk driving problem, if people just use DUI arrests, we would definitely say it's Pacific Beach. But we also have the most DUI checkpoints. So if the police department decided to set up more checkpoints in downtown San Diego than in Pacific Beach, we'd have way more arrests in downtown San Diego. So we definitely want to start with that data, but we want to add to it with other types of data. Calls for service, similar idea in that it gives us a picture. It's not an exact, it's not an official picture, but in terms of problem solving and crime reduction, not necessarily the official picture that we're dealing with. It's the overall picture. And those calls for service, such as noise and disturbance, and a lot of those calls that are coming in may be very relevant to your problem. I just did some work a couple weeks ago on bicycle theft. Well, most records management systems, you can't just pull out all bicycle theft crime cases. So I called up a friend, and she pulled out calls for service for theft, and then used the narrative to search for bike or bicycle, and we had to go through each call to say which ones were bike theft. That was the type of information, those calls for service, that helped us understand the bike theft problem, which official crimes or arrests could not. Field interviews, again, a wealth of information. This is kind of bringing in that intelligence side of, I like to use gangs as an example of that. To measure gang activity is often very hard because we don't have crime reports oftentimes that officially say it was gang-related. Or the arrests, although we're moving more in that direction. So gang field interviews can help us understand the who, what, when, where of gang activity. Traffic data, we do have several sites, smart policing sites, that are doing DDAX. Obviously, traffic data is very important to them, but depending on your crime problem, you may want to introduce traffic data, sites, collisions, other types of traffic data into your mix of data to help you understand your problem. But most importantly, don't restrict yourself to the common police data. So here's a laundry list of other types of data collection instruments that you might consider. I'm not going to go through them all. You can see them. You'll obviously be able to see this slide presentation after the fact as well. But surveys, interviews, talking to people to better understand the problem. We can't always get everything we need from those crime or arrest or calls for service reports, even from the narrative. And who wants to read every narrative, right? So think about what types of information you want and then how best to go out and collect that information. I have a link on here. Chula Vista Police Department has done a ton of surveys, really good, and they put their survey instruments out on their website. So I encourage you to go out there. One thing, if you are going to use surveys or interviews, don't reinvent the wheel, but also don't just slap someone else's survey onto your project. You really need to modify it to your needs, your problem, your community to be most effective in collecting the correct data. Some quick examples of current or mostly past, none of the new sites are in here because I know some of the new sites are also going to be doing a lot of surveys and interviews. But as you can see, Reno did a school-based survey, Winston-Salem a community survey, Lowell did surveys of officers, Glendale SEPT had surveys. So we see a variety, and I encourage you to contact these sites if you are going to be doing a similar problem. The Smart Policing Initiative website has a lot of information about each of the sites, so you can find out which of the other 31 sites are most relevant to your problem, whether it's data collection or how you're going to analyze it or what you're going to do with the information. So, stop and think. What types of data would you want to collect for your project that are not traditional sources? And what method would you use to collect this data? So once again, you can either write out to the chat group or feel free to shout out some of your information, whether you already have it in your plan that you wanted to do this or whether you just are thinking about doing this. We're not going to hold you to it. So this is just a brainstorming idea, maybe give some others some ideas of data collection. And I will go back to the list to help give you some ideas. But so what types of data and how would you collect that data?
So far, a response we've gotten, Julie, is from Sheriff Edwards, and they're using Facebook and mining social media data.
That's great.
I think that's a growing trend. Is there anybody else out there who's also looking at social media data?
Yes, Columbia Police Department does.
And Reno is doing that as well, correct? Sheriff Edwards, why don't you go ahead and unmute your line? It sounds like you've got some sources that you use for looking at social media types.
Bryant Jones, our analyst, is here with me, and Bryant can explain two recent sites we use that are very helpful because we find with the social networks, a lot of times they're open, number one. Number two, we can go in and follow the legal rules undercover and find out things. And then they're great for corroborating information we've already on top of. Bryant, you'll tell them about two sites we use.
Hootsuite deals with several different sites. You can use a keyword search. It also does a Twitter search. And then your openbook.org, you can go in and do it. It's another Facebook-based search engine where you search for keyword terms, and it searches anywhere in Facebook if anybody puts it on their wall. And sometimes the privacy policies have changed, and I haven't noticed a difference, but even used to when the accounts were set on private, even if they made a post on somebody's wall or on their wall, the keyword would still be found and brought up, and you can still see the conversation, even though you couldn't access the site. But it's all considered open source.
The two sites.
Any others doing any innovative data collection?
We're at the Columbia Police Department in South Carolina. We've used Twitter to actually locate where people are when they've been posting certain messages.
Good. I think that something to remember, obviously collecting that information is really good on the investigative side, which is extremely important. One of the things that I've seen in working in this field and traveling around the country is that even within our own systems, that we might be able to search for a case or a person, but the really hard part for the analyst is getting all of the data out. So I'm going to throw San Diego out again, that we've had a system where we can search a partial license plate, a tattoo, a name, or whatever across all of our jurisdictions in San Diego, a great investigative tool. But when it comes to saying, I want to pull out all residential burglaries with all of the information about them into a spreadsheet so I can actually analyze a year of data, that's where we often have these challenges and obstacles. So consider that as well. That's a whole other topic, but I encourage you as part of this project, especially because we do want to use a lot of data in addition to our investigative tools, to work with your CAD and RMS people on how do we get the data out into a usable analysis format. So, moving on. I think, did I skip? No. Okay. So, researching your problem. The word research often scares a lot of people, but in this case, when we say researching your problem, it's really just, again, finding out what other information is available, what other data, what other projects are related to your problem. So here are just some websites that I always use in terms of problem analysis of if you're working on a residential burglary problem, I'll just keep using that for whatever reason, go out to the Center for Problem-Oriented Policing, and there are about 60 guidebooks on specific crime problems. So great place to start in what's effective, who else has done that, what types of questions do we ask, lots of other information out there. Center for Evidence-Based Crime Policy, another great website. They have a matrix looking at what types of police projects. All of these that I've listed are very applied research. So a lot of good stuff out there. And depending on what it is you're looking for, you may find everything from a 100-page research article to a 3-page brief that anyone can read really quickly and apply it to your problem. That last bullet, crime-specific organizations. I can't say enough about that there are a ton of organizations out there that their whole purpose in life is to focus on a crime problem, whether it's in the crime field or not. So I'm working on prescription fraud, as Reno is, and there's the National Association of Drug Diversion Investigators. They have a wealth of information about who and what are the problems and what are the tools and what are the resources. But I would say also don't restrict yourself to a crime-specific organization. I was a few years back working with an investigator on illegal street racing. And we were putting together a presentation, and he had in there a statistic about how many head injuries in emergency rooms were caused by street racing. And I said to him, wow, where did you get that stat? And he pulled out an academic medical journal that it turns out 2 emergency room doctors kept seeing street racers in the emergency room and did a study on what percentage of their emergency room head injuries came from street racers. So spending a little time on the web, starting with some of these websites, but just obviously doing some web searches, you can find out a lot of other organizations that have a lot of really good information about your specific problem. So speaking of research, all of our smart policing sites, we have external researchers as partners with the police department, and it's a really great opportunity for the police to learn from the researchers and for the researchers to get their hands dirty with real-life crime problems. So one way that the crime analyst or the person that's in charge of working on the analysis part of this project can work with the external researcher is to develop the short and long-term outcome measures. This is really important because the crime analyst often knows the data the best, has been out there working with the police, and the researcher has that background on outcome measures and doing evaluations. So bringing those two brains or those two heads together at the minimum, the analyst and the researcher, and oftentimes you can get lots of great ideas from people that had never heard the word of outcome measure before this project. Helping identify comparison areas and groups for evaluation purposes. So we all need to also figure out, is what we're doing working? Well, the idea of how do we identify that comparison area? Can we pick a similar place within our jurisdiction, or do we need to go to an outside jurisdiction? How similar is it? What types of group of individuals can we compare? In San Diego, we're looking at gang members and doing call-ins. How do we pick a comparison group to say what we're doing is working or not? Again, very important that the people inside that are most familiar with the data and the crime problems work closely with the researchers who have that experience on scientific academic evaluations. And then lastly, developing data for cost-benefit analysis. This is also an important part from BJA to look at your smart policing grant, is what we're doing, is the cost of what we're doing, the programs that we're putting, the strategies that we're putting in place, how does that, weigh against the benefit? And that's something that the analyst can work with the external researcher on. So, making the most of your crime analysis resources. So we all have some level of crime analysis resources on these projects, and it really varies. Sometimes it's an analyst that's devoted solely to this project, but it might be part-time. Other times it's going to your crime analysis unit and just asking for data or maps. I encourage you to go to that end of working as part of the team. So number one, and this is in no particular order, including crime analysis and smart policing initiative meetings, training sessions, and planning sessions. Obviously, not every session or meeting is appropriate for the analyst to be a part of, but a lot of them are, and maybe ask your analyst, do you want to be a part of it, or what can you bring to the meeting, or what can you learn from the meeting? And so, again, being more a part of a team versus just the person that's asked to make a map or to hand over data is really important to the crime analyst. We all are short on time, but I get excited by this stuff. Maybe not all analysts get excited and would rather just produce a map, but I think that the majority would like to be more involved in the team efforts, in the problem solving, in the crime reduction, versus just spitting out pieces of paper. Number two, dedicate crime analysis resources to smart policing. So whatever you can do, obviously you all have a certain amount of money and resources in the grant, but keep in mind that that crime analyst plays an integral role in this project. And, thank you all, a little side note as it relates to this, for filling in the surveys. It was very helpful to me in creating this presentation, but also I think it'll be helpful to CNA in terms of what other things are needed. There are a lot of trends across, we have at all ends. The crime analyst is integral to smart policing and to our police department, to the end of we've never had an analyst, so we're not really sure what to do with a crime analyst. So hopefully this hour will get you going, and we can also, we being CNA, BJA, provide some additional crime analysis related resources to your sites. And that leads to number three, provide training to crime analysts where needed. So crime analysts that are working on these projects, I know a lot of them, and all different levels of expertise in terms of, I could easily be trained by several people that are on this call that are involved in the project on many crime analysis tools. whereas other sites might need the most basic, the crime analyst might need the most basic training of what is GIS or how do I make a crime map. So again, ask your analysts what's needed. If you're an analyst listening to this, be sure to speak up. I find that crime analysts often are too shy, and you really need to be more, not aggressive, that's probably the wrong word, but take the initiative, and it doesn't ever hurt to ask for training, for technical assistance, for tools, other things to help make your job easier. Number 4, consider technical assistance for crime analysis. So that relates to the training. You know, it may not be a training class. It may be 1-hour webinar. The International Association of Crime Analysts offers 1-hour webinars for $10. Piece of cake, easy. Anyone can fit that in their budget. All the way through in-class and online classes for $400. But a lot of them are very valuable and can take you to the next level of doing crime analysis. There might be other types of technical assistance. You might need a mentor. You might need to go spend some time in a neighboring agency that's doing some innovative things with crime analysis. So think about technical assistance not just for the cops in the field working on the project, but for crime analysis. Number 5, consider crime analysts the bridge between the researchers and the officers. And of course, no offense intended to either side of those, but as an analyst for the last almost 20 years now, I find that some researchers, and we have researchers working on smart policing that have been working in policing, should I say, before I was even born, all the way through have never worked with a police department. And that's where I'm talking that it might be that the analyst is the one to convert that scientific application to plain language for officers, or it might be that the analyst is taking what the officers are trying to say, this is what's going on in the field, and just putting it into terms that the researcher may better understand. So I think we play a really important role on this project in that terms of that bridge. And using analysts to support the officers. That's what we're there for. You know, analysts need to go to the officers and say, what else can I do for you? Officers need to go to analysts and say, can you do this? So we're kind of that support mechanism for whether it's in the field officers or whether it's management officers and or officers that are in management positions up through the chief executive on how can we support you. So real quickly, as we're running a little bit out of time, that I have some examples, and these are not in, I guess what I want to say is that I'm just throwing out a few very different examples of 4 sites. I believe all 4 are from the initial phase 1 of smart policing. And if you're from any of these sites, I apologize if I misinterpret or say anything wrong. And if you're not listed on these 4, it's not because you're not doing great work. It's just because we had short on time, and these are the 4 I picked. So Glendale, an example of a graduated symbol map on convenience stores. And one of the things I wanted to point out on this is that I think the important thing is they put the convenience stores on there that also didn't have incidents. So when you're mapping your crimes, no matter what crime it is, but some are more conducive than others, you want to say, why did a certain, if you're looking at bank robberies, you'd want all banks, because why did this bank not get robbed and it's down the street from the one that keeps getting robbed? In their case, it was the same thing with convenience stores. So the analysts also can provide these statistics of before and after, looking at calls for service at the different, so you can see it's broken out by the smart policing convenience stores, the non-Circle K smart policing, and then other stores to compare. So a variety of types of analyses can be done, and these, again, were only 2 of many that they did in Glendale. Memphis, different problem, different types of analyses that were produced. You obviously can't read this very well, but essentially they were looking at juvenile arrests and looking at the juveniles and the connections. So kind of that link analysis, organizational chart of the different juveniles that are involved with their target crimes. Another way of looking at it is looking at each juvenile individually and putting it on a timeline in terms of the crimes. So link analysis, network analysis, that type of thing is also being done in several sites across the Smart Policing Initiative. Los Angeles, a variety of maps related to their gun-related, gang-related crimes. So they looked at in their target area gun-related crimes that were gang-related on the left versus non-gang-related on the right. So a basic hotspot map, but trying to see if there are any patterns that are different, just all gun-related crimes, that wouldn't break it down far enough to see gang or not. Throwing on those gang boundaries to see all the different overlaps, looking at the repeat arrestees. So several sites are focusing on top offenders, lots of different ways to look at these top offenders and how they're related to certain places or not. And in Baltimore, also looking at offenders and gun crime, they do monthly meetings, bring together everyone to look at that data and analysis. Really important to get all those different perspectives from probation, from the cops, from parole, from the prosecutors. Specifically looking at felony gun cases and offenders and collecting, here's some additional information, 40 pieces of information. They created a database to capture all of this information so they could analyze it. They also captured or created a gun registry of gun offenders. More data for more analysis. One of the things that they were able to produce then was looking at the gun registrations and the rearrests. So are the people that are registered, how does that compare? Another way to analyze their data. So just a couple more slides. How can crime analysts support smart policing? Most importantly, we can use all the available information resources and identify new ones. So lots of information out there, but I see it as, and I think the smart policing folks see it as, one of the roles of the crime analyst is to help identify new ones. Shouldn't be just us doing it, but we should take a lead in that. Work with the research partners, as I mentioned. Work with the team to develop creative performance measures and creative strategies. Whether we talk about the SARA model, scanning, analysis, response, assessment, a lot of police departments will say, well, the crime analysts, they do analysis part. We should be playing a part in all of those. We should know what works and what doesn't when it comes to responses. How do situational crime prevention measures fit in to our traditional enforcement measures? Learn about and apply intelligence-led policing, predictive policing, problem-oriented policing. Smart policing is the idea of bringing together all of these different aspects, overlapping aspects of these types of policing. But all three and more center around analyzing data and basing our decisions, creating our strategies and responses based on that analysis. And look for opportunities to contribute. We can play larger roles on these projects and in policing and in crime reduction than we traditionally have. We have these great opportunities, and the Smart Policing Initiative is pushing that forward to push crime analysts into a greater role with that. So in wrapping up, one last stop and think. How can CNA and the subject matter experts that CNA has on board support crime analysts in their work with SPI? Are there additional training things that you would like? And as I mentioned, I will forward the survey, or they have the survey responses at CNA. What types of technical assistance? Is there any recommended analytics software or other tools that you're looking for specifically? Or any other types of things as it relates to crime analysis that you see you might need some help in your agency? So I will give you a couple minutes to either talk out there, write it out, and then I just have the last slides are some resources to provide you to finish up.
Does anybody have any questions that might have come up during the webinar? I know we got one question about whether crime analysts use network analysis in terms of mapping networks of offenders. So I didn't know if we wanted to go into that or if there are other specific discussions. We just got a question now about what software is working and what software agencies would you recommend the analysts stay away from. So, Julie, I don't know, do you have anything to add about the use of network analysis for crime analysts?
You know, it's being done more. Again, every department, obviously smaller departments who often have one or less than one, you know, full-time crime analysts are doing a variety of jobs. Some of the larger agencies that have crime analysts as well as intel analysts, you might see the network analysis more in there. I think it's a really growing field, and I think one of the things I would like to do on the San Diego site, and I have not seen, a network analysis that's overlaid in GIS on a map. So not only do we see the connections between the people, but is that related at all to where they live or where their activities are? So I think it's a growing field. There are some, through the IACA listserv, I know there's been some discussions of network analysis, and you know, I'd be happy to follow up on that. In answer to the question about the software recommendations, also, I mean, definitely don't have any time. It's a lot bigger discussion. But one thing I do want to mention about software, and again, no offense intended to any chiefs on down that have seen a pretty software and decided to go buy it, and then the analyst becomes a button-pushing person without truly understanding the data. I guess just be very cautious of that a software will solve all of your problems. So I strongly encourage the use of whether it's Excel or Access or your favorite spreadsheet or database program to really get dirty with the data. That oftentimes when our jobs are made easier by pressing buttons, we lose sight and understanding of what's really going on behind the scenes because we can just press a button and produce a map, and we don't understand what might be missing from that map or how to really interpret that map.
Julie, we got two more comments. One question was about liking to see more about how risk terrain modeling could be used to develop problem areas based on risk and how that could possibly help to work with the helping analysts.
I think RTM has a lot of potential. There's a free guidebook out. Joel Kaplan and colleagues wrote it that you can download and use for free. I think it might be available on the IACA website, and I can look up the exact website of where to get that. But and they also hold classes on RTM. Again, I think it's got a lot of potential because it's using historical data and adding in that contextual data. It is by area, though, so we always need to consider if we have a problem. I'm going to go and use my Pacific Beach neighborhood again. We have all those bars. So if we used risk terrain modeling or even a general hotspot type of density thing, we would have a few blocks, one neighborhood, that is a big red spot or highest risk. What that doesn't tell us is that these 5 bars are generating all the activity out of the 15 that exist. So we want to be as specific as possible. We can use hotspots and risk terrain modeling to get an idea of the area, but don't stop there. You need to drill down and say what exact locations, what exact blocks, what exact parking lots are causing your problems.
And Julie, we got another comment about recommendations on how to determine most criminals in the area because arrest data isn't always your best indicator.
Yeah, that's a tough one. If you can get access to probation or parole data, that can be helpful. There are others, I forget what it's called these days, the drug use monitoring. There's national data on going into the jails and collecting information about drug use from people in the jails. There are some really good studies about offender data. You're obviously not getting your specific offenders in those cases, but you're getting an idea of how certain types of offenders operate. In terms of specific offenders, you know, starting with that arrest data, using field interview data, talking to the community. Oftentimes the community knows who their bad guys are, but that's the tough part of, you know, how do you go in and do that? But survey and interview data might elicit some additional information there.
Sheriff Edwards also brought up that he would recommend combining prolific offender meeting data with other resources. And then Nick Saraceni from Frisco mentioned that they have a pretty good RMS system for mining data, but for them the difficult part is asking the right questions of the software so that you get the results you're looking for. And typically when you have a mountain of data, that's always your starting point, is what questions are you going to ask so that you can get the targeted results that are going to help your problem.
Right, and you know, I had an eye-opening experience when I went to the district attorney's office in 2003, and they have, San Diego DA's office has an amazing case management system. I have not seen anything like it, so I realized how lucky I was in terms of the data that they capture. It was, and still is, 8 years later, sitting down often with the programmer to say, this is what I want information, and I was very fortunate to have someone that was excited that someone was actually using the information to say, well, we can't do it this way, let's modify it this way. You know, in the prescription fraud work that I'm doing, we tried to pull data. Well, we have very few cases that have specific prescription fraud charges on them. So we had to search the narrative. Well, if you're searching all these different drug types, there was no way to do it. So, you know, a little beer and a little sweet talking, and I had a programmer changing the system for me. Not always the case. Maybe I'm really lucky in that case. But, yeah, you need to work with people that know the data, I guess, would be the bottom line, is if you can find someone. The programmer may not understand what you're asking, may not understand crime data, but understands how it's built in there. So when you pull out what you're looking for, you're not getting repeat of, you know, that you're not getting 50 records when they're really only 40, and it's just because there are multiple charges, they're listed twice, that type of thing. So it's a process, and I'm happy to, with this or anything, spend additional time one-on-one with you guys if you have questions like that.
Thank you very much, Julie, for a really informative webinar. And I want to take a moment to thank everyone who called in today. We appreciate your time and your attention because we know you're all very busy working on the particular challenges that you face at your different locations. I want to remind everybody that you'll be getting an evaluation form at the conclusion of the webinar. And if you could please take a moment to fill it out. We take these evaluations very seriously, and we look at each and every one of them, and we use your responses to form the future webinars that we provide, given your interest and what you'd like to see the next time around. So please take a moment. We appreciate it. Thank you. I also want to remind everybody that Smart Policing Initiative is a Bureau of Justice Assistance grant, and BJA is heavily invested in each and every location succeeding with implementing smart policing practices in their department.
Uh-oh.
And so now we're getting the commercial music, which means I need to wrap up. We want to also remind you that crime analysts play a vital role in successful smart policing practices, and we want to stress to everyone that's listening today, if you have any other questions or follow-up comments, please feel free. You could always contact BJA. You can also use the website, www.smartpolicinginitiative.com, and look at all the resources we have there. We've put quite a few resources, and we have some that address some of the issues that were brought up in the chat session. And I see that one of the questions we just got now is to get some follow-up on these issues, so we'll make sure to incorporate that into the website. And also, if you have any other questions, like I said, please reach out to us. You can either do it to the website. If you also look, you can also contact us there as well, and we answer all the questions that come through the website. So again, thanks very much for your time, and I'm glad you were able to call in today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Iris.
Thank you.